Did it work? The Wi-Fi? Bayfield 123 with a capital B?
No, big capital.
No capital. Okay. Everybody ready? Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming out this evening. I would like to go ahead and call the work session to order. It is now 6:30. Before we go into introductions, I would just like to welcome all of the citizens that are here for this meeting. And just know there's going to be a lot of topics covered today, a lot of discussion. I hope that some of your issues and concerns get covered. If not, there will be a section at the end of the meeting where we'll take questions and have some discussion. So you'll kind of have to hang tight and bear with us until the end. But I will go ahead and start with the introductions. I'm Ashley Tarkenton, Mayor of Bayfield, and we'll go ahead and start around the room this way.
I am Kristen Dallison, Mayor Pro Tem.
Alexis Hartz, trustee.
Jason Evans, Planning Commission.
Cash Nooks, Planning Commission.
Tom Wall, trustee.
Eli Luke, trustee.
Tish Nelson, Planning Commission. Rousseau Shea Heidinger, Planning Commission.
Lori Zazaro, trustee.
And on Zoom,
Brendan Warland, trustee.
Ryan Gadd, Planning Commission.
okay, then we'll go ahead and start.
I'm Kathy Cathcart, the Town Clerk and Finance Director.
Kenny Sickles, the town manager.
Rachel Davenport, deputy town clerk.
Becky Eisenbrun, Parks and Rec Director.
Joe McIntyre, Marshall. Jeremy Schultz, Director of Public Works.
Introductions.
Matthew Nyberg, Planning Commission Chair.
Welcome, welcome. All right, since we're all here, we'll go ahead and stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Oh, we didn't. Sorry, Nicole, I missed you.
Nicole Killian, Community Development Director.
And you're going to go ahead and kick off our mission, vision, and values handout.
Yes. I'm going to share my screen for those on Zoom. And first off, Brenna, Brian, can you guys hear us okay on Zoom?
Yes, especially you.
Yeah, I got you.
Thank you. And can you see the screen?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. All right, so just wanted to start with mission, vision, and values. These were adopted by the Board of Trustees for the town of Bayfield, and I won't read them, they're in the packet, but really just, this is kind of a basis for the long-range plans that we're gonna be looking at, comp plans, how we do business at the city. And so just wanted to make sure if there's any comments on these are something that, you know, can be amended from time to time if we feel like something's changed with the community. And so I just really wanted to start with this document, and again, no changes have to occur today, but if anybody has any thoughts or comments, I think it's a good place to start for our community as we get into these topics of long-range planning in the community, looking at the next 5, 10, 15 years and what we want to see Bayfield become, or what characters we want to retain in our community. Any thoughts on that? If not, we can move forward. I'll try and get through a lot of this material pretty fast because there's a lot here. I think one of the biggest things to point out is that this is really a high-level discussion, and some of these topics are going to be back in front of you for more specific discussions in the future. So really the point of today is to just kind of get some feedback, get some direction from the Planning Commission and the trustees on where you'd like staff to take the code and the comp plan and our other long-range plans into the future, and then some thoughts from staff back to the Board of Planning Commission on the process of how to do that. So that's really the basis of this discussion, and hopefully this is something we can do a little more often as a group as well. So with that, I'll go and start. The first section we're really going to cover is a comprehensive plan. So in 2018, Bayfield did adopt a comprehensive plan. And so this plan is not very old. Normally comprehensive plans, but they're also called master plans in state statutes, usually get a major overhaul every 10 years. And then it's a document that is considered a living document. So it's something that we should be looking at, reviewing, at least every year, if not more often than that, and making sure that it's still aligned with our community's values and goals. As things change in the world fast, we want to make sure that our comp plan is resilient and we can continue to change that with the changing environment that we have here in Bayfield. And so the comp plan really, it does outline a few things. It outlines where are we now, where do we want to go, or where we're headed, where we want to go, and how do we get there. And so kind of thinking of that bigger picture as we have this conversation, knowing that again, we're going to dive into some specifics throughout the year, but this is really a big level conversation. And so starting with that, I just put up our comprehensive plan map. This is a document that's our long-range plan. It's how we want to see growth occur in Bayfield for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And so this, as we look at the document, is something that we should also look at and make sure that it's still pertinent to what we want to see for Bayfield. And then the other thing with this document is both of these do need to be adopted ultimately by the Board of Trustees, and then the county usually adopts our comprehensive plan, future land use map as a district plan for Bayfield too. So we work closely with the county so that we are consistent with anything outside the city limits when it comes to development, knowing that someday Bayfield may annex that area into our city limits. And so to start, again, I wanted to really, I really want to think bigger picture, or I want you all to think bigger picture when we start asking these questions. But the two big questions I kind of assigned for homework is I sent implementation strategies list. This was created as part of the comp plan. It has every policy from the comp plan listed. It has who are the stakeholders, so who's responsible to implement those policies, the time frame. Some of them have a dollar amount to them. And then we also, working with all of town staff, put a status update of where things are. And again, I don't want to get into each one of these items because this would take hours in itself. But I really wanted you to kind of think big picture and think about what's on the implementation list that maybe doesn't belong anymore, whether it's just not pertinent to the community, whether it's been completed and therefore we don't need it on there because it's not an ongoing item. And then the second one is what's missing from this implementation list. And really just getting kind of the thoughts going amongst the group. I'm going to take notes so that we can put together a summary. I should announce we're not taking minutes for this meeting because this is just a work session. It's being recorded in Zoom. So if somebody wants to listen, they can go back and you can get the Zoom recording, and then we're just going to do a summary report, knowing that a lot of these items are just high level and we'll be getting into more specifics in the future. But really, just kind of wanted to spend some time hearing from you all on anything that you saw on this implementation list that you think doesn't belong or something that might be missing. I'm ready to take notes if you have anything. Let's start with what does not belong on the list. Anybody have any quick thoughts on that? And even if you haven't had a chance to really go through the list, what are some of your thoughts on things that maybe we're concentrating on in the our staff is working on that we really don't need to be looking at.
In the transportation section, I saw a couple references to adding bike lanes, and I just feel like that's really inconsistent in our town to where we could actually put bike lanes. I feel like the side trails that we have, where they're valid for both pedestrians and biking makes sense, but to actually make like bike lanes like Durango has, I think creates a lot of confusion, and it's not necessarily something that we need. So that
On
was.
the streets, you mean?
Mhm.
I kind of disagree with you, but that's just my opinion, you know. So I'm kind of big on having bike lanes. I don't think there are enough bike paths to get where you want to go without having to be in some hazardous spots. And so that's why I think we do need some more bike lanes.
Are there examples of where we would have,
Pardon me?
are there examples of where we would implement bike paths or
Bike
bike
lanes?
lanes? I'm sorry.
Bike lanes, well, we don't have any bike lanes
Yeah.
or bike paths even on, what is the Mountain View.
Okay.
And that's, we have kids walking back and forth all the time, riding their bikes.
Okay.
And that's a big one for me.
Dangerous.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe there could be, it's not town-wide, but maybe we could identify locations
Right,
that
and I
could
think
use
that's a
bike.
perfectly good idea.
From those two schools, intermediate and middle, so many kids go down to the library,
Mhm. Okay.
or the grocery store, or the Limerick.
And even the high school, but there is a path from the high school to the library,
Right.
but there's not from the intermediate and elementary, and that's, middle school, and that's a big one for me. And we've talked about the light, that was the other thing, the light with CDOT, because that's a big one for when we have the elementary kids soon coming in. I'd like to have a bike path there coming in.
I think there's more, based on my legal knowledge and also engineering experience, we don't have the established infrastructure to necessarily jump straight to a bike lane. We're still lacking extensive sidewalks
Right.
and other necessities
Right.
to predicate the requirements for a bike lane, because bike lanes in the state of Colorado have the three set requirements when it comes to the infrastructure in association with that, and so I think that is important to think about, but the fact is, even at Bayfield Primary School,
There's no sidewalks.
There's no sidewalks anymore. So I think that, yes, I think that some alternative ideas may be prevalent, but there's some other infrastructure that we
And that's kind of the thing is, you can't ride your bikes on the sidewalks.
Yes, you can,
Well, you're not supposed to.
but we have municipal code that, not that I've read.
You know what? I haven't read it lately, so I could be wrong.
State of Colorado, cyclists are allowed to operate on the sidewalk. You just have to follow the same Berkeley laws for as pedestrians.
I'll have to check. But that's a great idea, you know, that's something else that you brought up.
Sounds like identify the hazard, and then how do we meet that need? Is it a bike lane?
And
or
that's
is
where
it
the schools come in, you know, because that's a big draw. We have great schools.
Wait for that new subdivision, Clover Meadows, there's a whole bunch of families in there that are, young families with kids that are gonna be in that elementary school soon, and there's not really,
There's no
I mean, there's
sidewalks.
one safe crossing up above from Mason Meadows in, but there isn't really anything anywhere else. And I work in there all the time, and there's so many kids, when the school year's going on, they're riding their bikes to get on the bus to go to a different school, and it's just not some sort of infrastructure needs to be put in so we can safely get them into the bus lanes or into the school with their parents and everything.
And I think we've talked about the connectivity issues, especially over there on 502. You know, we've looked at that. I don't know where that is in the grants and all of that. But, yeah, you're right, some of them just kind of end, and it'd be nice to have
Right.
connectivity eventually.
So what is that, the bike lane at the street, is it, it's not Mustang, is it? That's right in front of the school, of the
Clover.
elementary school? Is it, it's not Clover, is it?
Mustang and Clover
They meet.
That's right in front, so that would be where we don't have the sidewalks?
On the one side, there is one
Yeah, it's
on
only
the,
on one side.
the new, on the Clover 7 side.
And there's a lot of stuff in here about crosswalks. In the state of Colorado, you have to have sidewalks to have crosswalks as a prerequisite. So that's just as much as pedestrian safety and cycling safety, there's some infrastructure just based on logistics that you're required to have. And just speaking from experience of establishing school zones and that kind of stuff relative to Grand Junction, it resulted in us having to work to get sidewalks installed because you can't have a CDOT and the Department of Transportation can't have crosswalks to non-state pedestrian crossings, so.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so you couldn't just put a crosswalk across 160 once we get those opportunities, unless we had the proper infrastructure to do so for a safety aspect, so. Just something to think about, 'cause,
And that's what we had talked about before.
yeah, so. I think sidewalks, like, is something that's missing here that would be a crucial step to lead to this infrastructure requests.
I just didn't want to take bike lanes out.
Any more thoughts on what's missing or what shouldn't be? Again, I mean, just even big picture, without having to look at each implementation measure. Any thoughts, Marion, on what infrastructure or lack thereof we have?
One thing that I thought about should be added would be a gym space, since we currently rent that from the school district. Encouraging a gym space, or even possibly the town creating one.
Like a community center?
Yeah, I mean, if we could go
That has a gym.
community center. But even a gym space, especially with the school district moving to a 4-day-a-week calendar and those Fridays being free, I feel like we're gonna have a lot of kids at the library and parks. And if they had a gym space that they could go to just to play basketball and even stay out of the winter weather in those winter months, I think that would make a huge difference. So I feel like we could grow parks and recreation in a lot of ways with that.
And isn't the Boys and Girls Club coming in too? I mean,
They are, but only for certain grades.
up to middle school,
Mhm.
and they're busing in the middle school to Durango, so I understand.
Yeah, I think it's from the intermediate school, but it'll only be for certain grades, and I feel like we're gonna have a lot of people that decide to
Well,
not
that was
use the
some freshmen.
service as
Yeah.
well. Or, yeah, the kids that are in high school, they'll probably
That
just
have
hang
no
around
driver's
town.
license, Yeah.
So, yeah, I feel like more space for them to be able to have a safe place to go will be huge.
I think one of the things we've seen a lot of too is development in the last couple months. So thinking back to some of those projects as well, what are the things that you think are missing that we weren't able to require? What are the things that we do require that maybe we shouldn't? I'm kind of thinking on those terms too.
That's on my list too, is xeriscaping in a lot of areas to conserve water.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's on the last page, 8.4.1.
Yeah.
I'd like to think about requiring dark sky friendly lighting. Or lighting period.
It's the second time I've heard that this week. I was approached by, maybe the same person.
When I think of xeriscape, I'm also thinking of, working with HOAs that may have requirements in their covenants.
Hence Mesa Meadows requires 20%.
25% of your front yard must be grass.
I'll say state statute, there was a new state statute a couple of years ago that said HOAs can't require that anymore. So some of our CCNRs are outdated, and don't meet state requirements. But yeah, so maybe we're working with HOA covenants, or help HOAs update covenants maybe?
Yes.
So is that something the town would be willing to do, to work with certain covenants to make sure that they abide by that? Cause I know Lodi lives in Mesa Meadows, I used to live in Mesa Meadows, and that was a requirement through the HOA, and so I think that, you know, that would need to be noted through the property management, which is AREM, that they couldn't enforce certain stipulations, so
I
that would,
think we could put together like some sort of, we wanna do that for stormwater as well, so we could just maybe look at and say, hey, these are some like clotheslines. A lot of HOAs don't allow clotheslines, and the state said you can't prohibit clotheslines. Solar panels, a lot of HOAs didn't require or allow solar panels, and so, yeah, we could probably give them some updates of how
Because
things might be outdated.
those are 3 updates that they would definitely need, because those were in HOAs that they could not have. And so a lot of people, you know, with today's economic issues, would wanna have a clothesline out there, and at every right they should be able to, so I think that's something that, you know, if the town, we need to let the HOA know, or the property management that oversees that HOA, so that they can implement that.
So I can't imagine what other HOA covenants are, but if they're as old as Mesa Meadows, there could be some things that are out of date that property management needs to be aware of, but they're not doing the job.
Are you part of does the Clover, is it part of their HOA?
No, the original Clover Meadows did not want them to be part of it.
So do they have one?
They don't at the moment. They're in the process of moving it over to the majority shareholder, which the builder's name is Shane Young, I believe, and he'll be in charge of it until it is fully built out, and then they'll have to get running on their own.
We had a discussion, probably, at the last meeting, about the fact that we don't have any enforcement power. You know, we can help them to update, but,
We can give them suggestions. So that the town, once the HOA, CCNRs, the original ones, we'll look at and we'll provide comments. But once they start getting updated, we're not, unless the city owns land in the HOA, we're not a party to any updates and changes to those covenants. So while town staff does not implement covenants, if we know of certain covenants in place, we also try not to approve things that go against covenants, but we're not always aware of what the covenants say. Because that's a lot more effort for us than just, implementing our codes and standards, because adding another layer. So we can maybe give them a guide that says these are some of the changes that have been made, you should consider, but we don't have any authority to require them to make those changes. But again, as a property owner, if your HOA goes against state statutes, state statutes trump HOA, so.
With the new developments going in and established housing setups, I've noted that there's some issues with easements with some of the newer properties, specifically with Mesa Meadows. We're having some major issues with the new developments and easements not being recognized and articulated in the new property developments. So I think as a city and as a planning development, we need to make sure that those things are identified and deconflicted prior to all that work that we put in. And it's just making sure it's done, or at least.
I totally agree,
Whoever's
because
speaking, you can't hear him at all.
Jason?
Yeah,
Jason.
sorry.
Speak louder for my.
It's just to do with easements, where we're just noting some major issues with easements not being identified from established properties with the new developments, and it's gonna result in some major just work done post-development that could have been identified pre-development and could have alleviated a lot of issues. So I think that's something we can do as a group to make sure that the property developers are identifying
Well, I agree with that, because all of a sudden, then all these variances come before us, and then Bayfield is now the town of variances because we grant them all. So, and, you know, I put it back on the developers to make sure that they know what they're doing, because I don't like granting variances. I mean, I think that's like one of the biggest disadvantages that we give to our constituents, because there's certain laws that they need to follow and they're not following, and we need to hold them accountable. So I'm with you on that.
And also, I think that provides the city a certain amount of good faith.
Protection.
The protection downstream that we're doing our due diligence to. If something is not done correctly, we've tried to implement them, warn them, to make sure that we're covered from a litigation aspect as well, so.
Agreed.
Any other thoughts on this? Kind of keep moving along and knowing that some of these things will be back in other forms in front of you. And I would say if you think about it or look through this, if you have any other suggestions, feel free to reach out to me and let me know. Collecting this information. So the next piece of the comp plan, again, you know, looking at, I would say, making some adjustments to it, not a complete overhaul. But would be, as I'm one staff person, and I do have a lot of other staff at the town to work with, but a working group is always a benefit to staff. It lets community members get involved in the process on a more technical level, because there is definitely a public process, and I'll get into that in a minute when it comes to updating our comprehensive plan. But there's also the ability to have a more technical group that can help with certain items. I listed on here all of the elements of our comp plan, you know, utilities and infrastructure, transportation, economic development, land use, environment, recreation, housing, risk assessment, and water use efficiency. And then I have a space here for other, if you think there's things that maybe we need to concentrate on, or create a whole new element in our comprehensive plan, we can look at that, or if we want to rename, readjust some things, we can look at that. But really what I would like the working group to do is to just help with some of that technical things where I might not have the time to dive into it, Jeremy might not have the time to dive into certain things of the comp plan that we would like to see some updates to, or some best management practices adopted, and we just need that extra assistance. I could see this group meeting like once a month for the next couple months to talk through things, and then they would have homework assignments. I could see it being a group of, you know, 7, 8, 9 people. You don't want it to be too large, but you want it to be big enough where no one's feeling super overwhelmed. And the idea that I have would be to, I know there's already some community members that are interested, but putting it out in the newsletter, putting it on the website, getting the word out that we're looking for some members. And then once we have probably like get a letter of interest from them, and then once we have a good group, let the planning commission and the board of trustees help us make that decision on who to appoint. And it's not an appointment as if this group doesn't make a decision, so it's not like the new tree board, but it would be an appointment of a group that will work with staff, and then we come back with some recommendations for the planning commission and the board of trustees to consider as you look at updates to the comprehensive plan. So if there's any feedback on the working group, any other elements you would like us to look at for comp plan update that's not listed here?
I like it. I think we have a really good group of gung-ho citizens that have done some awesome work and research on these projects that have come before us, so.
And you go with like the process of selecting them, getting like a letter of interest from them, and then letting the planning commission and the board of trustees appoint it. I mean, if we have more than 8, if we only have a handful, then I'll take them all.
Yeah.
But if we have a large group interested, then we might need it.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so we'll move forward with that idea. And then the last piece of the comp plan discussion tonight is really just outreach again. Like I said, there's the working group, and then a lot of newer people that have moved to town since the last comprehensive plan. We want to make sure they have an ability to participate as well. And so looking at probably having like a little table at the 4th of July, some of the block parties. I want to put together like an online survey that can reach a bigger group, that people might be more comfortable answering questions. I think the working group can help me with some of those questions too, and how we want to frame certain questions that we're asking. Do some public meetings, like probably here or other locations. Some school outreach. I'd really like to get into the schools in the fall. I've already kind of planted that seed with the school board, and I'll probably, try and reach out and see if I can talk to specific teachers when school's back in session. So I have a little bit of time to kind of formulate, because you want to be very specific in what you're asking students. But also what I've learned in my years of doing this is they have some really cool ideas that sometimes us adults don't really think about. And they're the future, we want to make sure Bayfield's a place where they can come back and live, be close to home, close to their family. So I'd really like to reach out to them, but just again, any other suggestions on outreach? And what I'll do is, as I'm formulating the process, I'll have a more specific timeline of how all this is going to look that I'll be probably giving updates on regularly. But if there's any other thoughts on outreach, I'm interested in hearing those.
Well, I think as, we talk about the economic development piece, I have a whole lot of questions on that, and I know that's an evolving process, but as the chamber looks to revitalize, I think that would be a good, lunch and learn or something, if you could come in when you talk about streamlining the process and how you start a business, and a welcome packet, and all the things that I have been wanting to happen for the town. I think that would be good to kind of look, or note for the future.
Well, welcome, wagon lady.
What was that?
Well, welcome, wagon lady.
Are you volunteering?
She said it.
Be good, Jude.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on outreach? I know Rotary too, maybe that.
Yeah.
Even seniors might be interested in having me come and
Yeah, that's great.
chat.
Yeah, Lions Club.
And you wanted to mention basically not just in town, but a potential for somebody that lives in the future growth boundary would also be a consideration. So, the discussion has been, do we look for 6 that live in town and maybe 2 or 3 that are out of town that are in the growth boundary? So basically, I'd like to hear your comments regarding that type of makeup.
Yeah, for the working group, will you?
Oh, yeah, I think we can expand it. I think that's
Yeah.
a good opportunity to.
And what about business owners that don't technically have residential property here, but they, have a stake in the community because of their business?
That opens up if I see that.
It's kind of like the school tenants area, because that's the community players, but we're not within the city limits.
I was thinking of the lady that does PCC, that's the director, she has a business at the lake too, but she lives in Durango.
No, thanks, Kate, for that.
Is there currently any public outreach for water supply, water resource, and wastewater treatment? Like, do we have any tours of the water plant, anything like that? I guess that's a question for Jeremy.
We've done it.
Okay. Yeah, I was just curious, because we do public outreach in Durango for wastewater treatment and water treatment, and I think it's a big thing because a lot of people don't understand the wastewater treatment as much, but the water treatment's pretty straightforward. Is there anything in the comprehensive plan regarding the drought as far as the 5 to 10 year scheme? If we end up running out of water supply, what are the alternatives for potable water, right? Do we treat stormwater and make it potable, or can we treat wastewater and make it potable if we end up running out of our supply in the next 5 to 10 years? Which is it's a real concern because we've been in a 20-year drought, essentially, so I think there needs to be definitely like more public outreach as far as water efficiency, so that's good, that's in the plan. But also water treatment to make it potable in case we run out of water in the 5 to 10 year, you know, like if Iceto runs completely dry or, you know, various supplies are basically wiped out. I think that that's really important because we can have all these developments and all these new houses and communities and stuff like that, but if we don't have water to supply, then that's an issue, you know?
I came from a garden club meeting and, somebody was saying that all of the springs out, 225 and 228 have all dried up.
Yeah, it's a real concern. I mean, for us, it's not super concerning yet, but, you know, it's not like we're Arizona or California. We don't have water problems that bad yet, but we could in the 5 to 10 year scheme. So just public outreach and, you know, trying to get people to be more efficient with water use and irrigation, obviously, for the farmers and all that. It all comes from the same place, whether we treat it for making it potable or we, you know, drink it and then, you know, treat the wastewater that comes out on the other end. That goes down to Nashio. It's a dwindling resource in the last couple decades. So I think that that's an important thing we need to think about, other than, you know, community development and everything else.
And we do have a drought plan, which was adopted last year.
Yep.
Yes.
I will say our website is lacking, and we all know that, and Katie's been working hard on getting us a new one. And I would like to see a place on the new website where we have even all our plans. That way even all the board and planning commissioners have access to everything. But my guess is you probably don't realize what we do have in our library of plans. But it'd be good to get those out into the public as well. So once we get a new website, we'll be building some nice pages, hopefully with a lot more information for everybody.
And not just the plans, but, you know, those, did you know, whether it's stormwater, drought, you know, reducing water usage. There's all kinds of things that I've been accustomed to in other communities I've worked in, is basically there's, you know, they move from another state where they, you know, they can use water that's running through their property. So we basically worked on those did you know type of little sheets. Obviously today's new technology, Nicole's talked about, you know, the QR codes that would be available, whether it's on our website, but we have a long ways to go still on our website. So it is being compiled, but it's still a ways away, so.
Well, we talk about this all the time in town as well. It's like, how do we get the word out? There is a strong disconnect to the community. Just, we'll have open meetings and have 5 people show up, and then people say, we did not hear that. It's like, how do you get the word out?
Well, a lot of people, like in the town of Bayfield, don't have water rights to, like, you know, for irrigation purposes. We actually have water rights for a very small flow portion, but it's not even metered. So that's good. We can like water crops and plants and flowers and stuff with the irrigation water because we have rights to it. But a lot of the people on city water, town water, they don't have rights to the ditches. And a lot of people will go set up pumps and stuff like that in ditches and not actually have rights to any of the water. So it's, I think, yeah, more of an outreach to people and how it works, and yeah, it would be good.
So when you talk about, just as Mayor Tarkington was asking, you know, how do we get that word out? What is the best way to do that? You know, I was a little bit surprised that really there's really no news that comes from the Durango Herald. You used to have a newspaper here locally, and I think we're getting a newsletter out, but it's once a month. I would say that you've got quite a few followers on Facebook, probably more than any community I've worked in. So at least that's good, but it's still a challenge to get that information out. And now that people are taking their express bill pay, they don't even get a newsletter. So they'll get a bill.
And that's automatic pay. There is the Bayfield in town, it's kind of like a listserv.
But next door?
Next door, yeah. There's a lot of people on that.
I think you also have to not forget about the people who choose not to utilize technology or,
Right.
or not
Right.
comfortable with, because I think we are isolating a large section of our community that maybe aren't utilizing social media apps and things like that. So I think just through education and the different types of learners you can't just put all our eggs in one basket and make sure we have it available for all members of the community, whether regardless of age, education level, or all those things, so that it is readily accessible for those people. Because
One of
I
the
think
things, I was gonna say, one of the things.
it's easy to press the technology button sometimes to try to disseminate information, but we fail to identify the people that maybe aren't utilizing that technology.
But one of the things we used to do is make sure they had the post office, the bank, banks, and the library.
Library,
That's
maybe we
something
should
like
be
a
dropping off a
poster
stack.
saying what is happening.
Oh, yeah, the newsletters.
And maybe distribute the newsletter to those places as well, make it available in hard copy.
Well, that's why I like the idea of having, a booth at the block parties or Fourth of July. I think those are big community gatherings where you kind of get
Everybody.
people out. So, I appreciate the time and effort the town staff is looking into putting into those
Yeah.
for educational purposes.
I'd just like to add an idea that I've seen work. It's hard to hear, but can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, my name is Kat.
Yeah, Kat, can you just hang on till the end for, public input?
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, sorry. Anything else?
All right, so we'll move on to the next item, which is our Parks and Recreation Master Plan update. And I know Becky's here too. I'll give a kind of an overview and then feel free to add in. But for Parks and Rec, back in 2017, we adopted the master plan. And one of the big components is the community plan for Joe Stevenson Eagle Park. And so we're talking internally about how we want to proceed with the implementation of that park plan. And it's going to be very costly, and so I know Becky's done a little bit of research on some funding, but it's going to be a costly plan. And we also have some components, which I'll let her kind of fill you in on, that are impacting the ability to move forward. And so this point of the meeting, we want to kind of discuss the community park plan, how we want to proceed with that. And then there's also a piece of that same park in terms of naming. We've had some suggestions for park name, which you all got a letter that was sent by Ms. Moreland, which I know she'll be prepared during the public input section to speak to. But wanted to go ahead and open that up, and so I'm going to let Becky kind of give you more details on the park.
Yeah, so kind of off of what Nicole said, the plan was constructed in 2017, and it really focuses on the river corridor. So the main focus is on Joe Stevenson Park, expanding kind of the recreational fields in there, add in basketball courts and volleyball, sand pits, a dog park, things like that, moving the skate park. And then it kind of branches off into the 23-acre parcel, which would be a lot of trails that connect to Joe Stevenson, as well as river access and a fishing dock. And then it branches off down to the the wastewater treatment plant. And that is more trails, river access, and then also the idea of the relocation of the rodeo grounds. And so when you look at the budget for this year, last year we budgeted for this year is to look at a playground for Joe Stevenson. And when we started digging into that and talking to GOCO, GOCO kind of revamped their whole program. They are now considered GOCO 2.0, and they're not really funding these smaller projects such as just a single playground. They're more looking at broader projects, very similar to our entire conceptual park design. And so when looking at it, we can move forward with going with a GOCO and making these steps towards it, but there are a lot of things that we kind of need to look into that are red flags that are stopping us from moving forward, such as the rodeo grounds. So when you look down at Joe Stevenson Park, we have the rodeo grounds dead center in the middle of our parks. In order for us to move forward with these plans, and it's really hard to kind of see the map on there, but the rodeo grounds, I don't know if you can see Nicole kind of. But anyways, so the rodeo grounds is kind of in the middle, and in order for us to move forward with the project, we have to acquire that property. And when we were going through the design process, we talked to stakeholders such as the Rodeo Association, and they were on board with moving the rodeo grounds down to the wastewater treatment plant. But the thing is that as soon as the rodeo ground or the Rodeo Association stops using that property, it deeds back into the school district's hands. And so really we need to get involved with the school district to acquire that property to move forward with anything in Joe Stevenson. If you look at the map, and there is a road and a parking lot that kind of go through the middle of the park, and that's really not obtainable where the rodeo grounds are, as well as other things such as the dog park, basketball courts, volleyball pits, things like that. So we're here kind of today, kind of looking for your guys' direction and help and thoughts, discussions on whether we kind of just go for it and start talking to those stakeholders, such as the Rodeo Association, the school district, or do we go back and look at revamping our conceptual park design and kind of starting with how can we design this park around the rodeo grounds?
I think it starts the conversation with
Yeah, talk to the
stakeholders.
stakeholders, definitely, I agree.
See what we can do about moving it, because I think they would be happier over by the water treatment plant as well. I think they would have a lot more space. They wouldn't have the craziness from the park, interacting with their horses, plus they would be able to have the trail system as well. So it just makes much more sense for them to be over there.
The Rodeo Association was 100% on board with moving. It's just this, at this point, when this master plan was constructed, there was a different superintendent at the time. And so it's really restarting that conversation. So,
Do we know who's superintendent now?
yeah.
It's Leon.
Yep.
And he was the high school principal at the time, so hopefully he's somewhat clued in on
Totally.
the future plan.
He should be, he's in agriculture.
He
He's
can
a
do it.
4-H leader for the 4-H club here in Lopata County. So he should be into having this conversation about it.
And so looking at maybe the town being an applicant for a large GoCo that could help pay to relocate the rodeo grounds as part of a bigger ask. And then if we don't get that, then maybe we have to scale it back, but
Yeah.
aim high first.
Yes.
Also, getting comments that it's very hard to hear on Zoom, other than, I think you were speaking. So probably the rest of us.
We might have to, we have a microphone so we can pass around, and I didn't wanna do that, but we might have to grab those when people speak.
Of course they're yelling.
Yeah, or, yeah. I think that, so we might wanna grab some of those. Unfortunately, it's not ideal with our sound in here.
I think if we're going to approach the state for funding, we should ask for everything. Like, why not ask for the moon? It worked for Grand Junction. I was part of the river development in Grand Junction from a law enforcement standpoint and community development standpoint. And there was multi-million dollars invested in that development, and it's continuing because the state's seeing a return in it. So I think Greg Canton is connected to Lopata County, who's now the town manager up in Grand Junction, and so we do have a connection and a resource up there that we can reach out and ask for direction and guidance on what made them successful, but I would recommend that we ask for everything, because it would make it a huge community development, and the state does have that funding set aside, and it should be going to communities like ours.
So, was anybody in on those discussions with the school? Were you on the board at the time? I mean, how does that work? If it goes back to, if it gets deeded back to the school, I mean, is there some agreement, or do we have to purchase it from the school, or is there, how does that work?
Depends on the agreement.
The property just becomes the school district property, and we'd have to work on an agreement on how to acquire that, or could they deed it into us, like, you know.
Are,
Can
in
you
that,
just acquire it from the rodeo grounds, from the rodeo association?
no, it gets
No.
deeded back to the,
In that area, all we're looking for is mainly the road to go through it, correct? So they wouldn't technically have to like sell us the property, they could give us an easement?
I mean, technically, if we wanted to, we can just do a portion of, I wish we could see the map better, but, so pretty much the road would just be the soccer field up towards the playground. So if headed north, it'd be the playground, soccer field. And then past the road, what you're talking about, Kristen, would be the dog park, basketball courts, more multi-purpose fields, because once we cut in with parking lot and roads, we do take out some of the playing surfaces, and so we would add more below as well. And so a lot of the project is south of that road. But it's definitely something that we can talk about.
Could you go grab that right now?
Yeah.
Just for us to look at. We have a printout of it.
Sometimes this works good.
it's the strangest thing. Tuesday.
Yeah, do the other part of it,
Part to the TV?
the white part onto your computer.
So Brenna and Brian, who do you hear the loudest? Can you hear like when Ashley speaks?
Ashley, and I can hear you, but I have a hard time really hearing anybody else. A little bit of Kristen, I can hear her too.
Can you hear Becky? When she's speaking?
Yes, Becky.
Okay. I was like, she's got a mic right in front of her.
So maybe we just move
Shift that one down.
this one down here.
It's harder to hear the gentleman, I hate to say it, but.
All right, we're fixing that.
You can use your outside voice.
Yes.
We're getting a map right now for all of us to look at.
And then here's one for you guys, just like.
Zoom around, yeah, Zoom, you guys can see it pretty well. But it's not coming out on the screen very well.
So the biggest part of this plan was basically moving traffic off of Bayfield Parkway into Joe Stevenson Park versus going around East Street. So, and we even looked at a possibility of trying to go around the rodeo grounds, and you just can't do it without losing too much property. So it's interesting that this plan was basically created with the rodeo grounds, the assumption that it would move, and without it moving, the plan just does not work. And we've had overlays, and we looked at parking spaces, and it just doesn't work. And obviously, a commitment to go forward means there's also got to be a commitment for funding. Typically, GOCO is 70-30. So in other words, the town would have to fund it 30%. It's not going to happen all in 1 year, but once you start developing it, if you move the rodeo grounds and you ask to purchase that parcel from the school district, you know, those are all things that we'd have to go through. And I know that state statute handles school district property a little bit differently than they do town or county property. So that's another challenge. However, they did transfer Joe Stevenson Park, those fields to the town. So we are an eligible recipient of that property.
But I feel like this is the missing link to so many other questions that we have, like our economic development, our recreation. You know, this is a game changer for our town. You start seeing a thriving downtown. You start seeing businesses move into those vacant buildings.
We start using the river.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think it's something that we definitely, and I know we, aside from housing and internet, it's been a discussion for the board, so.
Yeah, and a dog park too, which is, I mean, it's gonna get all of the dogs that are off on the baseball field currently in a proper zone, you know?
Well, and gives the, trucks and trailers better parking.
Yeah, that current rodeo grounds arena, you can only maybe bring in 30 trailers before they overflow and start going up South Street and everything. So it'd be a good idea to have like a more adequate space for that large of a vehicle to be bringing in.
So the question, just being new to the idea is, do we want something more? I know this plan was generated with this set mindset, but if we're going to, do we at least develop or look at for further growth, like maybe not initial development, but further growth as a major downtown recreational area? Like, I guess that's the question I ask, is beyond this immediate direct impact, if we were able to have this, is there a place or position that we want to plan for further growth to expound on this park area as a community center? And I guess that's the question I would
In
pose.
this area, I don't know. I mean, I feel like the design was meant to fill this space pretty adequately.
I guess
You talk about like,
I'm guessing I'm thinking further down on the other side of Eagle, connecting to that lovely trail system that we have off of 160. And
the barn.
making, yeah, and making more of a, like a nature,
And then-
riverwalk type
Conservation,
concept, like
yeah.
expounding further beyond just this location, I guess, is, do we look at something a bit more robust for long-term plans beyond this, in this development idea, you know, if we're gonna go big?
that's what you're saying, ask for it all.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm not saying we have to develop it all right off the bat, but it could be as simple as, you know, we're
Part
gonna.
of it's in your plan.
Yeah, we're gonna try to push the riverfront trail further down and along the riverfront all the way to connect to the 160 and appropriate things like that, you know. And I guess that way we don't just limit ourselves to this success, but potentially further success and further growth as a community. And I guess that would be a good feedback for the community, I guess, would be is, if we had this, what else would be beneficial for the community long-term through that growth?
Brenna, did you have something?
Yeah, but don't we have some, I don't know what it's called, things we have to overcome when it comes to having trails and that sort of thing? Aren't there some protected areas and right next to the river that causes some issues?
Like the wetlands?
It's a wetlands,
Yeah.
yeah, in that area, but you can still use it for a natural area, and still can be developed, well, not developed, but basically manicured into a natural area, because you do have a wetlands, we do have a requirement when the bridges were built, to maintain that as a wetlands, so there are some environmental issues we will have to comply with.
Yeah, that whole middle section was designed around those wetlands and more natural trails.
You guys want the other maps?
Yeah. For the, to show them
I
the
brought them
rodeo
all in,
ground
so-
area would be awesome.
So this one, I'm gonna give you guys.
So
the
currently that
updated
rodeo ground sits
parcel,
like right here.
And that's kind of the wetlands area.
Yeah, for those of you on,
And then this is the way
three different
Yeah.
pieces. This is
Going
the
up,
other-
up the river a ways, yeah.
This is that northern piece.
They're not really, unless the town buys these properties, they're not really. much you can-
and I'm not glad, I'm just saying, like,
I'm excited to see something like this though, because that's me.
no,
This whole section,
Good job.
I'd like to see it built nice.
In it correctly, because I'm not there and looking at it through the PowerPoint presentation, is where we're trying to connect some of our extracurricular activities that are connecting to the river. What we're trying to do is that in the rodeo piece, was that the thought?
The rodeo piece right now on the plan has the relocation of the skate park because of the roadway on between
because
the current ball field and Bayfield Parkway,
down
would
here
pinch out
And
the
that's what I'm
skate
getting
park.
at
So
right
that
now,
would
is
move
that-
down by the rodeo, as well as a multi-use field,
like,
the basketball, pickleball courts, and the dog park.
because that
They're all kind of on that southern end, so you can see that road that comes off Bayfield Parkway and then it goes south. That's all on the rodeo grounds right now. And what Katie was saying is if we move the road north to accommodate the rodeo grounds, then it's gonna get into the field that's there right now. So we have to move some of that field or and change that field around.
Yeah.
So where would be the rodeo grounds on this?
Over
It's on the
here.
other map.
It's south of the wastewater treatment. You know where that's at?
Okay, so we're putting it, here's, and the arena parking, so what are we doing to build the rodeo grounds?
What we're talking about is we would be the applicant to apply for a large grant
That would be
that
part
would
of it.
help pay to relocate them.
Okay,
That's the process we want to go through, which it sounds like it is.
How many miles of trail is this? I'm just envisioning the Bayfield Half Marathon right now. And people, and bringing everyone from Durango who does all the runs to Bayfield and paying to participate in registration. To pay back some of this that we're doing for that 30%.
You can make afterwards down on those.
Exactly. Yes. So, see, half
I don't think
marathon.
it's 12 miles, but.
Yeah.
you might have to
We
loop
do it 2 or
around.
3 times, yeah.
You do a couple.
But,
Yeah, well, you can do that too.
Call it the
But-
rodeo tent.
Yeah.
Our riverfront in this community is a major asset that I think we are underutilized. And seeing the development that occurred in Grand Junction while I lived there, in the drastic improvements and
I get to
access
run
to
there
it.
too.
Yeah, the drastic improvements and access to that have drastically changed that community. And I think we have prime real estate that, as long as we efficiently address those environmental concerns and do that correctly, we could, it's just like Durango. I mean, they have a beautiful river area that they've done a good job of accessing over the last 15 years. And we're not doing that yet, and that could change things drastically for us as a community developer.
Well, I'm gonna tell you one thing Durango did, because I worked there for 16 years, half cent sales tax for open space and parks and rec. That's a big difference.
But we have to have a starting point too as well. And I think this is the starting point.
But a lot of that, not only the cost to get the GOCO grant to actually implement it, but then the long-term maintenance of it
Right.
is quite expensive.
Well, yeah, ever since they upgraded the wastewater treatment plant too, it's a lot better, and the community likes that area a lot better. They just recently basically finished Santa Rita Park, or the reconstruction of it, and there's volleyball courts, people are still enjoying the river, you know, there's new parking and all that stuff, so Santa Rita Park is thriving right now, and it's right next to the wastewater treatment plant, so.
And bicycle right back,
Yeah.
bicycle path,
Yeah,
walking
exactly.
path.
Yeah.
Well, like I said, that was my comment earlier, it's the missing link to a lot for this town.
Well, it's like Palisade, is another town that did the same thing.
And my biggest thing would be just recommendation is looking at utilizing as much of the riverfront that we can effectively use while not making it too complicated. And we do have a large section running through the city, you know, fishing access, you know, can we utilize that kind of stuff and those things that can just bring in as many people to our community to utilize those areas appropriately. And I think that is a resource that's not being utilized in Bayfield right now to its full potential.
Well, I think that idea has been visited several times, and, you know, we still run into that stumbling block of the willow nuthatch. And so it's just that environmental factor that's gonna be the biggest key player in how we go about, you know, negotiating that, because they're an endangered species that has so much, you know, nesting ground. So that's kind of where the state steps in and is like, yeah, you can do this, but yeah, you can't do that. So.
And Becky, is there a time frame? Like, when do the grants need to be submitted? Is it ongoing? Do you have any?
I believe GOCO has, is it 2 or 3 cycles now?
There's 2 or 3, yeah.
Per year.
I think the thing you really need to do is talk to the school district
Initially?
and make sure that there's some, you know, IGA or something that, you know, if the grant is ever awarded, that we're able to move the rodeo grounds. And those stakeholders should also be involved in some design and access and parking and, you know, other amenities in that area. And then hopefully it's a gift to the town so that we can increase, parks and recreation. Because very honestly, you have a very active Bayfield youth soccer and softball. I mean, I think it's a very popular place to come. So you're just increasing all the amenities that go along with it.
But what if the school district comes in and says, no, we don't want to do that?
That's always a possibility. That's 50%.
Yeah, Joe Stevenson's part of it would be.
But keep in mind that the community also, not only we're supported here by the town of Bayfield, but also the residents of the Bayfield School District are also should be informed of what we're doing and what we'd like to do so they can talk to their board members. I mean, that's the process.
And if the school district says no, you could, like Santa Rita, just reverse where you're putting your different amenities that you have, bring them down to where you currently want to move the arena to. And, I mean, like Santa Rita, you're right next to a water treatment plant, and you use it. It's fine. It's natural, and it's accessible, and it's nice. So I don't think it would be too difficult to change that up just a little bit and have to move them down here. I mean, yeah, it's a little further away from the center of town, but if that's what we have to do to make sure we get some good amenities and we can use them, then we might have to go that route.
Well, there might be some success with some joint use properties with the school district as well. If it reaches that discussion, where what is the need that the school district has for some outdoor space that could be utilized, and their players like us, and if that's nature area or field access or some extra soccer fields or those types of things. So I don't think that it would be a limiting factor. We may just have to shift the discussion and orientation of those appropriate things. So.
And just a side note, Pine River Shares has wanted to create the north side of that into a community farm. And, those are perfect ways to understand how to grow food, to raise animals, and, if they proceed with that. And to me, that's a great asset in an agricultural community.
And the new superintendent has a lot of FFA background.
So the one thing that I see missing in this plan is roadside park and Little Pine, and they've gotten very popular. So I feel like some upgrades there, and definitely a bathroom is severely needed.
Because there used to be one there.
Bob's John's will not deliver us a porta potty at all anymore because it got absolutely
So there used to be
An actual.
Yeah. I went into one where the domes are in Pagosa, and gosh, that was really, really cool. It was completely stainless steel in there, so you could literally hose the thing out. Just to make it very, very, it would have to connect to water that way, but it would be so much easier maintenance-wise. The toilet, the sink, walls, everything is completely stainless. So I think that's something we should look into.
What's going on with the visitor center over there? Is that the building that's never open?
Well, the building's gone.
Yeah, the building's gone. It's just
Oh,
a,
the building's been gone. That's where the bathroom used to be.
Yeah, it's just
I'm very observant.
a board, a marquee, right?
Yeah, which probably
It's
either
outdated.
needs to be fixed or
Trashed.
taken,
Yes, trash.
taken out. But that was the chambers, and there's this ownership issue, and then, so I don't know, it either needs to be, like I said, it needs to be fixed, or it needs to just come down. So, I'll talk to the chamber about that. Since I can't get off that board.
So this next piece of the park discussion, I think, Katie, do you wanna take this one? You kinda have
Sure.
the history of it.
Well, we'll talk a little bit about names, park naming. Obviously, we have many of the names that are well-known in town, and you can tell them what park you're talking about. Joe Stevenson Park, there's an assumption that the whole athletic sports fields is Joe Stevenson Park. And when we're going to have an event in town and it's going to be at Joe Stevenson Park, we're going to say Joe Stevenson Park. We also have a request from Jackie Moreland to name, and of course we talked about the Ed Moreland Sports Recreation Center. There's been some other things that have been thrown around regarding the park name. I know that there's, Jackie sent you a letter that's in your packet, basically at the back, regarding the fact that there's probably a no-name park that considers the athletic fields. A lot of times when you have an informal name that is well-known, in fact, if you just Google Joe Stevenson Park, it's going to take you right to that park. So, you know, what I would really like to consider doing is that we are redoing the west end of Mill Street, which I call the gateway to Mill Street. And I'd really like to see that Ed Moreland be honored in not only his recreational area, but his business support, as calling the Ed Moreland Gateway to Mill Street. And that would be an honor that we would like to kind of consider. James Harmon was a past mayor. He created the stone column with the bell on it, and also the flower garden that's across the way. We did have to take down the 2 pillars. We're going to redo that that area that he did, but we wanted to make sure that he was recognized. There was actually a plaque on that fell off when we were out there kind of reviewing to see if we could move that flower garden, but we just couldn't move it. It fell off. It was on sandstone. So we kind of decided, and I've talked to the relatives of those people, and we would really like to put up a sign insignia of Joe Stevenson, honoring his work, from what I understand, with the schools. That's what he was known for. And then James Harmon for his contribution of creating the stone base for the bell, and also for that flower garden. So in redoing this west end of Mill Street, you know, I think that instead of naming a park after Ed Moreland, we'd really like to honor him as the gateway of Mill Street, just because of his business support and his recreation support is right there. There's a lot of ways you can do that to honor people, but I'd like to kind of get your feedback. I know that Jackie is here. I'm sure that she's ready to make her case. But that's what we'd like to, for this, the Planning Commission and the board to consider.
Is James Harmon Harmon?
Yeah.
Harm, yeah.
Just wanna clear that up. Who's James?
It's on the plaque.
I mean, I'll start. I mean, I always knew Ed as the economic developer. I mean, that's who he was as a mentor in my life, and the discussions. I love the idea. I think it kind of, yeah. I think it's, you know, I'm sure we'll hear from Jackie at the end, but I don't know how the rest of you feel. I think it's a good spot for it, for sure.
At some point, if you decide to name ball fields or soccer fields or the new volleyball thing, you know, then you would have, you could do that later at a time, you know, when this is developed, and create some type of marks or signage that you feel that honors, you know, those people that may have contributed to Bayfield.
Well, I agree with Mayor Tarkenton that we definitely need to honor him, and I love the idea of honoring him for the business and the economic development that he did. There hasn't been anybody who's done as much for La Plata County as that I know of, and I just really like that angle of honoring him for that. In the same breath, I don't want to take away a name of a park that's already been named and for somebody who's been honored in the past. So I think it's very appropriate.
I would agree. I think if we start changing park names, then it sets a precedence. And, you know, the people that have already have names established, we need to pay on to and keep it that way. So I just think it would open a big can of worms if we changed it every so often. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of great people that do a lot of great things for this community, and I think we can honor them in different ways.
If we get the trail going around, there could be a bench system, with plaques on it.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
All right. Any other thoughts on this before we move on? Okay. So the next section is land use code. I just brought up the zoning map. So really what we're looking for the land use code, and I've been here, I think, about almost 4 months. Yeah, over 4 months now. And just as I've kind of been processing and reviewing projects, there's a few things I've already noticed in the code that do need to be addressed. And I'd like to walk you through some of those, and I'd like to see some of those back in front of you this summer. And then there is probably a full set of code changes that will come once we get an updated comp plan as well. Because what we want to do is make sure that the land use code is implementing the comprehensive plan. But I just wanted to walk you through a few. I did kind of write a little paragraph for each of those in the packet. I'm not going to read that verbatim, but just kind of give you some highlights of some of the things that I'd like to bring before the Planning Commission and Board of Trustees this summer. First one's oil and gas regulations. We don't have any. We have projects that have those facilities, and we do need to adopt some regulations. I'm talking with the county and following their process, because I think that we could probably take what they've done and maybe massage it a little bit to make it work for Bayfield, but it'd be nice to be consistent with the county's regulations. They are hoping by mid to end June, it'll be out for public review. So once that's out, I'll be taking a look at that, and then hopefully not too long after they adopt it, we'll try and bring something forward. Any questions on that one?
I have a question. Are we anticipating any other developments or anyone else coming our way before then? That we might wanna have something?
Not that I know of, nothing on the radar after Mustang, but Bayfield East does have two. They're not quite there yet, and they probably won't be in front of us at that conceptual level by the time this is done. I mean, that's just a guess based on the fact that they really need the signal to be in to really start moving forward. So, I don't have anything else on the radar that is impacted by oil and gas after Mustang. Second one, sign code updates are, a couple years back, there was a Supreme Court case that affected every sign code in the country. I won't get into too specifics because it'll be in front of you, but it's called content neutrality, which you can't judge a sign based on what's written on it. And so that, our sign code currently does not meet that requirement and therefore could be challenged.
What about abandoned?
Abandoned signs are completely different, yeah. So there's things in abandoned signs that they have to qualify for, like, the sign face is deteriorating, they haven't been maintaining it, so there's certain levels there that you can kind of
What if you
categorize
don't
it as.
have the business? It says motel, and we don't have a motel.
If the sign's in good shape and it's on private property, it's a tough one now, under Supreme Court ruling, because you're looking at content. And so there's a few different ways that you can do a sign code. I wanna keep it as simple as possible, I don't wanna overcomplicate it for people. So I'm kinda looking at other sign codes, and getting some thoughts on that. It might be be worth, the sign code itself might be worth a special study session before we go into making decisions, so that everybody understands it, because there's a lot to the sign code. So that one could take a little bit more time, but it's something that we do need to look at, and, so I just wanted to put that on your radar. That's gonna be coming, at some point in the near future, hopefully. But we'll look at abandoned signs and see if there's any way we can kind of address those as part of it without getting into that content.
Just a question.
Yeah, that was a good question, actually. Fence standards, I've had a couple requests for fences on Mill Street recently, and we don't have any commercial standards for fences, so it's something I wanna add into the code, which have residential. Food truck regulations, right now, we have a few food trucks in the community. However, we only allow them, our code only allows them on a temporary basis, 180 days or less, unless they get an extension per the town manager. We have been lenient towards them, especially through all the COVID, time that we've had. And so we really wanna look at addressing those and trying to make them more of a permanent use, and what are the criteria that they need to meet in order to become more of a permanent use at certain locations. So that will be coming in front of you, unless somebody has any thoughts on that.
No, I think it's something that needs to be looked at, because it's kind of the way of the world now, those food truck courts and stuff, it might be coming our way.
Yep.
Like I said, I've done a complete 180 on food trucks myself. I was not a fan of them, and now it's like, they're
Yeah,
kind
there
of
could be
important.
brick and mortar we're concerned, because you have a lot more overhead
Mhm.
than they do, but I think they've come a long way and they've been accepted more. So something we wanna look at. Vacation rentals, I had a couple questions as I'm reviewing this that I'd like to get some input on. Right now, our code says that you cannot exceed 3% of the total number of assigned residential water taps. So that's a moving target as we get more development. And so one of the questions I have for the Board of Planning Commission is, we want to just set a set number. Like, this is how many vacation rentals we think make sense in our community, versus having this moving target percentage based off of how many new water taps we get when we get new development. One thing I do as a planner, I'm not anti-vacation rentals, I think there's a place for those, but I do wanna make sure everybody understands that workforce and attainable housing and vacation rentals don't always go hand in hand, because a vacation rental takes a housing unit off the market or off the rental pool. And so you wanna make sure we balance that so that we do have a livable community. I could say Breckenridge is a good example, but we don't wanna be, because they don't have many full-time residents. Most units are either second, third, fourth homes for some people, and vacation rentals, and it really does change the dynamic. I know Bayfield's not there yet, but Durango's getting there, which means it's moving, it's coming this direction. And so, something to think about, if there's thoughts, and again, this might be a special study session, maybe we do signs and vacation rentals, or just have them separated, where it'd be good to like give you some draft language for thought and have you kind of ponder. But I would really like to see more of a cap versus a moving target for.
But you have a cap in certain areas.
You could do it by certain neighborhoods, that's what Durango did. You can also look at certain neighborhoods and say, we don't wanna see any there, but we wanna see them here. I mean, there's a lot of different ways we can look at it. Or we can just say cap community-wide, and we're not
Well,
really
I'm
concerned
thinking
about that.
of this, if this goes as exactly as we want it to go, we might end up with more vacation rentals right there.
Yeah, closer to that area. Well, and again, I mean, are you worried about, them being all in one area, or do you wanna spread them out? So those are good questions to have. Right now, we only, again, this is not like we have an influx, we only have 3 right now.
How many do we have that aren't legal?
It's pretty high,
Yeah.
just from looking at VRBO and
Personally, never.
Airbnb. Yeah, there's about 15 that I know of.
Yeah, it might be something we need to, what I would say is when you start implementing new code, that's when you start, you gently say, hey, we got a new code, we're gonna start enforcing at this period of time, you need to come into compliance. And we try and work with people versus just heavy-handed going out. But usually when you adopt a new code, it's a good time to just let the community know, hey, this is happening, and we're gonna be starting to go after them. And it'll be in compliance. So that's one. Right now, because we have 1,032 taps, and that was as of last week, 2 weeks ago, we could have up to 30 legal in the community. So just something to think about. Is 3% comfortable number? Is 30 a comfortable number?
Where did that come from?
I don't know.
It's
I
a
think
code.
we just wanted to cap it at something,
Yeah.
so that it didn't get out of control
It
if
was
a whole
based
bunch of
off
applications just started rolling through, you know.
So again, because we only have 3, we're not there yet, but it's a conversation I have to have. And then the other piece of this that I don't have on here is ADUs. Right now, our code does not prohibit vacation rentals in ADUs. However, ADUs are used by review that's not a by right, but it's a little bit extra for somebody to have on their property. A lot of ADUs in other communities that you can follow around the country are really tied to long-term rentals, not vacation rentals, because again, it takes that rental pull out of the market. And so right now, our ADUs do allow, it looks like they allow vacation rentals because it's not prohibited. So that's another conversation I like to have is, as we're allowing ADUs in single-family neighborhoods, do we want to allow those to be converted then to vacation rentals, or do we want to keep them as long-term rentals? So something to think about. We don't have to have answers today, but it's going to be coming your way for some thought and discussion. Notification requirements. Right now, our code requires notices to be mailed by certified mail with return receipt. So the return receipt, what that means is somebody has to go down to the post office and sign. And so when we're noticing neighbors of a project, it's inconvenient for them to have to go down to the post office to see what they're being notified for. So I'd like to remove the return receipt and just have certified mail, and that way it can be delivered right to where their regular mail gets delivered to, and they don't have to take that extra step. So that's a simple one. Subdivision improvement agreements, that's what they've been called, but really they're called a public improvement agreement. When a project has to put public improvements in, we go through this process. Marlin Village is a good example. They're not subdividing yet. I call it a subdivision improvement agreement. So I'd like to revisit the name of that, just for clarity's sake, coming up. So again, another just real simple one. Here's a little bit more complicated one, but permitted uses by zoning district. As I'm looking through this, and again, I will say granted, this is really the first time you've had a planner who can kind of handle some of that a little bit more. But in the past, a lot of these go through a use by review to the planning commission. And here's a good example. I have a restaurant that wants to locate in town in a commercial zone, and it's 6 weeks out because they have to go to the planning commission by the time they get through their application and stuff. And we want to see those types of uses. So I think the question I'm going to bring, and I'll probably bring to the table as a whole, as I'm going to question some of these, maybe should be a permitted use in certain zones rather than having to go through that extra step. We want to see that type of business coming to our community. So again, I'll be highlighting the ones I think make good sense that myself and Katie can ultimately approve administratively without having to go through a hearing process.
And I think one of those is childcare. We had one childcare that went through the process, and really those could have been administrative. There could have been notice to the neighbors, and then administratively approved unless there was a lot of opposition.
Yeah, so we're missing a category there that Katie just hit on, and that's we notice neighbors, but it's administrative. We don't have a category like that. We have either administrative, planning commission, or they go ultimately through the board of trustees. And so there's a category where we can still notify neighbors and have a public process, but it doesn't need to go through a hearing process, and that's a much shorter process. So again, something that we want to look at. Affordable workforce, development review process, number 9. This one, as I was thinking through, like when I first started all the staff reports, I spent a lot of time writing to come for the planning commission board of trustees for the things like Marlin Village is a good example, Orchard. They've they had so they, Orchard beside, but like Marlin Village did a conceptual plan amendment, or comp plan amendment, sorry. Then they did annexation, then they did conceptual plan, preliminary plan, and final plan. So they were in front of the board of trustees 5 times, and the planning commission 4. And that's a lot of staff time too, to write a lot of staff reports on this. And so one of the things I was looking at is maybe taking one of those steps off. And so they could come for, like, comp plan amendments need to come, annexations need to come, but then maybe conceptual and preliminary both come. And so maybe it cuts one, but maybe final, if they meet all their requirements and approvals at the preliminary, staff can finalize the final plan with them without them having to go back through a hearing. So it saves them some time, it saves staff some time. By that time, we've heard public comment, we've heard from the planning commission and board of trustees. And so, again, something I'll probably be recommending on some of our processes is just not as many public meetings for some of the projects. Others might need more public hearings. Or, I think the planning commission and the board of trustees shouldn't be shy to continue something if you feel like you're not getting all the information. And so maybe if we have less, you might see more of those types of things happen if we're just not feeling comfortable moving them through at that time. Maybe they need a fifth, but something that we can judge for each one. Number 10, affordable workforce housing. So there's a lot of grant funding right now for affordable housing, workforce housing, which they're different things. Affordables usually have some sort of restriction on them. Workforce is usually more of an incentive type program, like developer build this, there's some incentives here. And for infrastructure, so I'm thinking some future projects and maybe even Cinnamon Heights to get infrastructure funded. What the state wants and the federal government wants, they want us to have some code language in our code already adopted and ready to go for these types of projects, so that our code simplifies the process for them and clarifies the process for them, and therefore we will be eligible to apply for more grants. This one may take a discussion as well before it just comes to public hearing of what type of incentives are available for those types of projects. But if we want to see those projects in the community, we really need to look at adding some code language specifically for them. And the last one on this list is building permit inspection fees. In 2016, we did adopt the 15 international building codes, except for the energy code, which we're still in 2009. But we did adopt the fee schedule, and so we're still using an old fee schedule. And so we want to look at bringing that up to the same level as the codes that we're using, as well as you all are aware, we have a consultant that helps us do our building inspections. And there are a lot of meetings and things that I'll pull him into where the town pays for his time, but he doesn't charge a fee, or like certain inspection fees and stuff. So we want to kind of create a table of when he should be charging an inspection fee for some of that time that he spends as well. So that'll come before you. It'll be very clear and outlined of when we want to charge him versus when we want to offer just his expertise, and know that the town will cover that cost. And so we'll work through that. But really, those are the big ones so far. I'm sure there's going to be more as we get into things. But I guess one question I have for you all is there anything at the top of your mind that you want us to look at in the land use code that will not come from a comp plan, like a bigger, because I'm thinking like density and things too that I want to kind of discuss, but that's really going to have to be coming out of the comp plan discussions. But anything in the code right now, and again, if you can't think of anything, because I know it's already 8 o'clock, email me, because I'd like to kind of keep an ongoing list of things that, probably need some adjustments in our land use code.
I'm not sure where this would fall, whether it would fall under either of these, but does the town have any ability to get rid of a lot of like junk cards in those yards and?
We do have some language right now. I think the thing is we don't really have code enforcement. I'm trying to take on a little bit more of that, and so we've been complaint driven for a long time. And again, I think we want to educate people first on what's allowed, and then if
We
they don't
have a neighbor that
respond-
has 6
unless they become a nuisance or, health or safety for some reason, and that's really hard to, yeah. So, but we do have some language in there. We're working on creating more of a code enforcement process. We're not quite there yet, so we're still kind of complaint driven.
You're gonna get mad at this one, sorry. With the increased development, I would highly recommend that we entertain looking at additional building code requirements. And one of them being that I deal with extensively is the existing structure building code requirements. So if any public improvements are done, essentially it sets the standard, and is nationally and internationally recognized of what those standards should be. Perfect example is if we're still operating off the 2009 electric code, which would be 13 years old, I'm aware of 6 iterations of it. So with the extensive development we're doing, I think we should be setting the bar to what the standards are now, because they have drastically changed. Plus, there's also quite a few urban development and community development standards that are recognized nationally that could aid us in some of our desires for long-term community development. So I have pretty extensive experience with them, what I do professionally, so I can definitely help out with my knowledge of those, but there's a lot of nuances there. If we adopt one code, sometimes they reference other codes, and if we haven't adopted them, it can cause quite a few issues when it comes to people building buildings and construction, so.
Yeah, right now we're at 15 for everything but energy. We're aligned with La Plata County, except their fire code, their fire code's older than ours. And when I've been talking to the county building official, and they're looking at the 18 code. So I think that's something that when they move forward, it might be something that we want to consider. So again, staying consistent with the county, we may want to move forward with the 18 as well at that time. And I think it's going to be in the next, probably before the end of the year is what they're talking about. So that could very well be becoming proliferate. And I know,
I'm not familiar with these codes, and, I mean, are there codes that are from 2021 that we wouldn't want to consider?
Yes,
And
so-
why are, we can follow the county, but we could also be the leader.
we could. So they're international codes, and so it's like commercial, residential, plumbing, mechanical, electrical. There's some property maintenance codes and then energy codes. And we are on the 15 right now. I know Durango just adopted the 18 codes. They did not go to the 21. I was part of this before I left. They did not go to 21 because the energy code in the 21, they've been hearing a lot of issues with it, and the cost increase for a home, a developer to put in what's needed to meet the 2021 energy code was a lot more expensive. Like from the 15 to the 21 was a huge jump, whereas the 15 to the 18 was not much. And so with the housing cost, what they're trying to do is, Durango specifically, they're trying to keep the housing cost so that they can see some level of cheaper housing, even though we know it's not super cheap housing. But what's happened is the developer will put that cost onto the homeowner. And so they're just trying to balance that with having updated codes, but also the cost to do those. Now, there is some, and Jason might know better, but there is some payback period for like energy code where it's upfront cost, but then over time it pays for itself. And so we need to look at that type of thing. So yeah, we can look at the 21, we can look at, again, Durango just did the 18, La Plata County is looking at the 18. So we could be a leader, or we could say, let's just, stay with what everybody else is doing in the area right now. And I think I'm up for whatever discussion you all want to have on that. We can bring you a lot more information as we get to that discussion.
I'm guessing updated codes, when you're saying things are like, it pays back itself, so we have more energy efficient, perhaps water efficient.
The energy code's really mostly on like energy saving. Yeah. But I can get more specific information if that's something you all want to understand, is the difference in cost and where we're at now for construction for maybe like an 1,800 square foot single family, give like an average cost increase, as well as that payment over time, cost savings over time. We could do some of
Well,
that.
I think if you listen to like the builders group, they
I mean, you'll see contractors pull out of here if you try to make it too difficult.
Yeah, as I say, it's a balance. You wanna meet
The-
that balance, especially right now.
The biggest thing is I'm seeing we're trying to increase our entry-level home, which I can see an increase of townhomes, and those requirements are sometimes nuanced in different codes than the ones I've seen the city has adopted. And just from my personal experience and professional experience of reviewing those extensively, there are just some other codes I would present to the board to entertain, because I think they could benefit the community long-term if we have them in place for the community members. And where the restrictions are, the newer codes aren't as trial and tested. Something in 2018 has been established in the market for an extensive period of time. So sometimes those codes are a little bit grandiose in the newer ones, and the market hasn't met those expectations. So, but yeah, I mean, we can talk offline or in internal section. I can bore you extensively with building codes. So, but they expound. The nice thing is the newer codes expound on common spaces and address those types of things and things that we could have developers have to address as a community as a whole, that are addressed in the building code and lined out in that way, which is nice. Newer codes have addressed those things a bit more clearly, like the common use spaces and things like that weren't common in 10, 15 years ago.
So that's all I have on there. Anything else? Let's go, I got code enforcement and looking at newer building codes. Alright. So where are we at? I think we're water to start. So this, and Jeremy's gonna help with this, but, you know, as we've been sitting through a lot of our projects that we've been reviewing lately, you know, the question keeps coming up about water. Do we have the water? I know Eli brought up some good points about water and drought. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure we're tying everything to realistic numbers. As we're looking at, okay, new projects coming in, we'd like to be able to plug them in and say, okay, what is gonna be the water demand? We wanna be at a place where we can actually answer that question very well. So we've come up with, right now, a table. I will say we have water engineers looking at some of this stuff, and so some of these numbers will be adjusted, and I'll kind of talk a little about those. But what we're trying to do is just kind of say, okay, where are we at with water? Knowing that we're probably gonna be in a drought year, very possibly, so that's gonna look a little different, because then we have the drought plan, that changes. But if we were in a normal year, and then normal can change for us too, and that's something we're gonna have to evaluate over time. But right now, our current rights, and this would be, once we get the Schroeder ditch case finalized, we have 2.3 million gallons a day of water rights for the town of Bayfield. Our current production capacity, and this is based on the building, the water treatment plant, is 2.5 million gallons a day. So we can treat up to that. The current storage capacity, so this is our storage tanks, is 1.75 million gallons. I did have per day, but I was corrected, it's actually gallons. The current demand, if we use summer months right now, and this is where we're having our water engineers really try, they're digging into our data to see what bills have been between a period of time, what usage has been for residential versus commercial in a period of time, so we'll have a better number. But right now, we're kind of using this 600 gallons per day per user, and that's not per person, that's per like household or per business. And that's during the summer months. Usually in the winter months, it's, 250, so it's quite a bit less. But in the summer months, if everyone's irrigating, 600 gallons per day. Right now, we have 1,100 water meter taps. So at 600 gallons per day during the summer months, that's 692,000 gallons per day. That is our total demand in the summer months. So you can see, if you look back at our rights, what we can produce, what our storage capacity is, we're in good shape on a good year, a normal year. And then we were also asked, and Kristen, I know your question was a little bit more than what we can actually calculate right now, but during those summer months can put out 428,000 gallons back into the river. So 62% of what's being used in the summer months coming from the water treatment plant, 62% goes back into the river for downflow users. So those are just some good numbers for us to kind of get an idea. Now, future development, I took all of our future development projects that we have right now, including Bayfield East, even though they've just been annexed and they haven't gone through the development process yet. But that would add another 435,000 gallons to our demand in the summer months, which would take us to 1.1 million. And so again, we're trying to get our water engineers to kind of help refine these numbers for us. The water rights that I calculated 2.3 does not include any transfer of rights for Mustang, Marlin having to pay, or Bayfield East transfers. They have water rights. So this is just on our current rights. This is what our numbers look like. So again, this will be adjusted if we have a drought, and we go into a drought year, and our drought plan becomes effective. This is gonna look different. But right now, this is kind of what our abilities are. I don't know if Jeremy wanted to add anything to this?
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Zoom, or do I just share a microphone with Becky? No, you kind of covered it. There's a simple, bar graph on the back, and what I was trying to illustrate is our current raw water availability versus our change case. And I just have to point out there's blue and there's orange on those. Those are the priority of the water rights that we currently hold. So the orange on there is Los Pinos water, that's a P4 water, which is more valuable, it's a higher priority. Then the blue is the Schroeder, which is a P12. So as Trustee Luke mentioned previously, those P12 waters will be called out prior to the P4. So this change case is going to be really valuable once we can get it converted, because it really does give us some higher priority water moving into some of those drought years and the drought conditions that you had talked about. And so I just like to point that out, that what we've been working on over the last, 7 years has been those higher priority waters in the town. So I think we're in a really good shape if we can get this change case completed. And to speak a little bit more to the drought management plan, in working through that document, if we do go into a severe extreme drought, that does have some trigger points, I would say, for some operational changes for production and plant operation that are going to get rid of some of those additional evaporation losses, or some of the more technical aspects of making that water, that we're going to try and go into a little bit more conservative measure of producing the water in order to squeeze more out of it for the town residents in the future.
What is the event that, is it before and after?
So the before right here is what we currently have. That's our current raw water availability is 1.2 million gallons a day.
Okay.
After we change that, we're gonna convert another 1.2 gallons, or 2 MGD of Los Pinos water, which is P4 water. So we're technically gonna double our capability, once we can finalize the change case.
Okay.
What is the estimated time for that completion?
That's a very good question.
Well, I mean,
Well, we're 8 years into it.
no, I'm just saying, Nicole just stated, though, that with these current developments that have been approved or in pending approval, that will be at 1.1, and we're at 1.2. So to me, I'm optimistic, but it's also,
We're close to the end. We ran into another hiccup recently with PRID, and from the sound of our conversation, our water attorney seems optimistic we'll be able to stipulate their concerns and be able to finalize this, I would say hopefully by the end of the year.
okay,
I'm not 100% with that timeline.
And just remember, my numbers are based on like Bayfield East full build out. And we probably won't see Bayfield East moving forward until we have that signal in, so we're a little ways off there too, and this is full build out for that project. So, this was based on everything that we have in review right now, which could be 15 years out, 10 years out for development.
but that's just stuff that's been approved right now, right? Not any additional development. And I guess that's the concern I have, just looking at the surface, is the things that we have on the table right now put us at essentially at our limit or close to it, add our conditions, pending approval. Now we're in a different boat, but still, it's just something to think about. Do we have those checks and balances in place to have those discussions? Are we going to put a halt to any further developments in the city of Bayfield, pending those things? And I guess that's the talking point, I guess, that I'm bringing up is, right now, what we are approved or pending approving is putting out our water capacities without being in a drought condition.
And I would say one thing that I'd like to see, and I know some of our community members have pointed out coming out of the comprehensive plan, is how we utilize our water. What type of, how do we have more landscape controls? So I would like to see that 600 gallons per day drop per user at some point, based on other things that can come out of these discussions as a community. So I think, again, optimistically, we'll get more water, and maybe we'll reduce our usage of water based on other things that we can do in the community.
And East would also guarantee us water as well, because they have 2 irrigation ditches running through. So we wouldn't technically be at capacity, they would bring in water to even that out.
Yeah, that water would still be converted, but one thing to keep in mind, this chart's just showing what our adjudicated shares are. That's not taking into account any of the additional storage water that the town purchases. I mean, if we hit this limit, it's not like they're gonna turn the spigot off and our hose is gonna get shut off and we'll be like, everyone, run for the hills. It does cost more to operate when we go into storage water, and we do purchase that water. But it is a savings account that we have, that we can go into during a drought, and to make sure that we are able to supply adequate resources to the town residents. So there's another 90 acre feet of water that sits up there in a bank that we can call on if we do get called out of priority, or if we get close to some of these limits of extreme drought. So it's not a concern. It is an additional operation expense, so keep that in mind. But I just thought I'd clarify that.
In extreme drought, we're not letting people use, 600 gallons a day either. Like you're stopping irrigation. There's a lot of things that'll happen too to bring that amount down as well.
So
That's like
my point was is that we're reaching limits for future development plans, and that's a concern to me because, we're getting a lot of interest in Bayfield's community from a development standpoint, and we need to make sure we have the proper infrastructure, because when the good is good, but when it's not so good, what are we going to do? And that's just something we need to be very aware of as we address those things, especially if we're trying to bring businesses in and those types of things, and increase the livability and where people are staying here. Our hope is to reduce water intake, but if I don't have to go to Durango to go to the grocery store and don't have to go eat in Durango because I want to go out for a date, and we're staying in our community, that water usage and that existence is going to go up as a community as a whole. So we just have to be aware of that.
But when we have a development come in, we have to annex it into the town, we also get that ditch water, or most of the ditch water.
If they have it. So like Mustang has shares, Bayfield East has shares, and again, those were not calculated into this because our water engineers are still doing those calculations. So that's why this is gonna be updated probably very soon when we get those numbers. But like Marlin does not, so they do pay an impact fee that the town can use to go purchase more shares. But yes, so this does not include the developments that we've approved, shares that they're bringing in, because we don't have those calculations yet. But they will increase. But I think we understand, and that's why we're doing this exercise, is we wanna know where we're at. We wanna be able to see a development come in and say, is that sustainable? But we also wanna look at other ways to make our community more sustainable in terms of how we use water and be smarter in how we use it as well. So I think this is gonna play a lot of key roles for us in terms of having those further discussions with the community, as well as educating ourselves to know where things are and being able to tell that story to you all when a new project comes in too. So we're getting there, we'll be able to tell that story a lot better.
And the new billing system will also help kind of pin that water usage and that cost to those that are overusing. I think that what I could just kind of recognize when I first got here is that it was not the water consumption. there was not really a good billing system to enforce better water use practices. And hopefully we're getting there.
Well, I think too, it's just, it looks, the big picture looks very grim, and I think it just puts the fear in people, and I always try to remind people, we're not in that bad shape. I know that we have to think about our future, and I think that's what we're doing, but if you listen to conversations around the community, everyone is talking about water, they're talking about drought, they're talking about, you know, this wind and lack of rain, and, you know, all the things, but it's, you know, I like to remind people that there are people studying this for our town and looking into the big picture. And we as a board, as a planning commission, we're not gonna go off the rails and approve things that we cannot sustain in this community. That's what I just wanna remind people of, and that's why I'm glad everybody's here and we're having this discussion.
So, I just have a question. So we have these water rights. So what happens when that water is not available to give us our share? That's the drought plan, right?
Yep, we
Okay.
go into the drought plan, but also, like Jeremy said, we have some senior rights too, where we have rights over others.
Okay.
But again, we wanna be super responsible with having those senior rights too, and so that's where the drought plan comes in. But there's other things that we do wanna look at as a community, knowing that we're kind of heading that direction where water is getting less and less than what we used to have. And so, I think the comp plan's gonna help pay for some of that. I think that'll lead to the code, that might lead to newer building codes with more efficient, I mean, there's a lot of things that we need to look at in order to get us there. It's just gonna take a little bit of time and kind of baby steps all the time to get there. But we wanted to get a better idea of what the picture looks like, and then kind of start chipping away at how do we improve our situation. And education's a big one.
How do we get the word out?
Well, so part of the drought plan is to divert like Schrader ditch water if we have to.
No, not necessarily to divert Schroeder ditch water. It goes into different tiered rate structures, and there's also additional restrictions. There's some enforcement activities that are defined in there as well. So, if it was severe extreme drought, either extreme drought, we're gonna go no impervious watering. We're gonna cut back on, you know, exterior lawn irrigation and some of those things. And then as far as just some operational controls, we're probably not gonna be running as much of the ditch water that we are into the reservoir. We'll start pumping. That gets rid of evaporation loss. When you look at those 1.2 million gallons, they take a 10% ding for evaporation loss and ditch loss. So we start moving that water into a pipe, we gain those extra gallons, and we process that way. So there's some things, there's some valves we can turn and some adjustments we can make to also operate a little bit more efficiently, but it does come at an additional production cost to the plant. So, you know, while that water is available, we're gonna operate as efficiently and as cost effective as we can, so we can pass those rates on to our customers as well. When that water gets more scarce, then we're gonna need to move and start trying to go to a little bit more conservative practice in the production. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, definitely. No, I mean, like Durango, you know, their water plant basically is supplied by Lemon ultimately and feeds the Florida. And, they have this big reservoir just upstream of their water treatment plant. Their numbers are a lot higher. It's like 10 million gallons a day that they're treating or something up there. But yeah, some of these ideas about how we, you know, plan for the future, the next 5 to 10 years with having that water available, I think it's a good thing to talk about. So appreciate it, Jim.
So I'm sure we'll have plenty more discussions on water as well. Like I said, once we get more detailed information, we'll try and share that, continue to share that. If you're all interested. So the last piece on here before public input is just, we want to give you a Cinnamon Heights update. I'll kind of start and then I'll have Katie kind of fill in, but, we do have SGN Engineering, which is our town engineers, working on engineering for, the townhome plat. They're doing engineering, we have some architecture going on, we're looking at driveways, looking at, I think 3 right now, ADA units is what we, are looking at being able to do you out there. And so they're doing all the engineering plans, connections, water, sewer, all of that right now. And then the next stage would be to review those plans. And so we want to have this discussion and be as transparent as we can that SGM is also our town engineer that does development review for us. And so right now, the office that's doing the architecture engineering coming out of that is in one location. We have our Durango office that does the reviews. And so we wanted to have that discussion with you all because I know that that could look like a conflict. And we wanted to get your input on that and whether you're comfortable with us still using SGM or if you want us to look at other options for this project. I know this project's had some controversy in the past, and we want to make sure we're keeping everybody in the loop as we move forward. I don't know if Katie wants to add anything to that.
So SGM, the office out of Grand Junction, that's where the architectural and the site plan, that engineering is going on. We work directly with the Durango office. SGM has quite a few offices around the state of Colorado. I have worked with the one in Glenwood Springs, so they could find a completely different office to review the plans, but we would have to have some type of review of the reviewer. So you have SGM reviewing SGM's plans. Obviously, when we talk to one of our engineers from SGM in the Durango office, they're not even apprised of what's going on. So, but we wanted to make sure that there was any issues that the Board of Trustees felt was a conflict, or it comes before the Planning Commission, and you've got our engineer and our engineer basically doing the plans and the review. Wanted to make sure there was no issues with that. Or if there is, then we just need to find another engineer for the review portion.
How difficult is it to find another engineer for the review portion? Because since you're already right out of the gate saying there could be a conflict, I just think
It's perceived as a conflict.
yeah.
Yeah.
I would tell you professionally as an engineer, it is a conflict of interest. You work for the same company, same people cashing their checks, and so I would say as an engineer, I would take that as a conflict of interest. I contacted my engineering company when I got permission and asked permission professionally to volunteer for the planning commission because of concerns of conflict of interest in doing business here locally. So I would say from an engineering and ethics in engineering, there's a conflict of interest. So I would highly recommend to the Board of Trustees that we entertain a separate, second independent, plus it also, again, it alleviates any potential litigation issues down the line. If there is some sort of issues with the development, we've done our due diligence to make sure we've given it the proper oversight.
I mean, we had that a couple times with, Nancy.
With SEH,
Taking off
quite a few
different
times.
hats and switching gears. So, I don't mind shopping,
So we'll just make sure that we contact some local engineering companies or somebody in the Pagosa Springs area and just see if there's a firm that has the interest. It'd probably be another contract with the town for that purpose.
And if there's nothing else from the planning commission or the board, we can open it up for public input and ready to take notes.
So we'll want to get them on the mic.
Yeah, that one's passed.
Yeah, you
can
wanna-
pass that one around.
Anybody that wants to.
Do you want to start maybe with Zoom and then move into the room?
Oh, yeah, we did have
Does
that.
anybody on Zoom have any
Yeah, I think Kat was trying to.
input, questions?
I'm Pamela Smith, and I do have questions.
Okay.
I have a couple of questions for Jeremy, if he hasn't left yet. In regards to the, raw water available, can you tell me please, our capacity for making treated water available? Are those numbers comparable?
I guess I don't understand your question.
She probably can't hear you.
So you're asking about raw water availability or treatment capacity?
I was asking, is the raw water available? Are those numbers the saying, is that supposed to mean that that is the amount of treated water that we could provide daily?
Yeah, after the change case,
Are they the same number?
yeah, after we complete the change case, our raw water available will be maximum treatment capacity for the water plant.
Okay. And my next question about water for you is, can you quantify for me the difference between the out-of-town use versus in-town use with numbers?
I can't answer that at this time.
What?
I can't answer that question at this time. I don't have that information available for billing.
I apologize. The audio portion of this has been absolutely, really bad. I've only heard the female speakers actually were the only ones that could be understood. The rest of it, it's been very difficult. The other questions I had were, well, first of all, I'd like to say I'm glad that we're going to have somebody who's going to be doing some code enforcement. I think we really need it. As far as the dark skies are concerned, I remember when that came through the planning commission and the town board, and there was absolutely nobody wanted to do anything about lighting other than to make sure that all business lighting in Bayfield was down facing and fully covered. And that is not happening in our neighborhood. In town center, that is a real problem. The other thing I have a question about and a comment about is the parking in the Mill Street district and in town center. I see the community center, I believe that had 70 parking spots. I'm wondering if there has been any thought to possibly putting in additional parking at the end of Mill Street. There's a couple of lots down there that are PUD, I believe, at this point in time. I'm wondering if anything has been done about that. The businesses on Mill Street were supposed to provide in lieu of parking fees, and I don't think that's happening. While GOCO money would be great to help with parking at a community center or to assist with any of the other events that we have in this area of town, it would be nice if we could perhaps have that shared with the businesses that do use the parking. I guess that's all I had to ask about, if perhaps that had been discussed about the parking, because it is a problem and it gets worse every year. Ooh, no comment, sorry.
It was not discussed today, I guess.
Yeah, and most of the property that could be converted to parking anywhere on Mill Street is private property, so it would have to be purchased by the town and then turned into parking. So there's.
Right, that's why I was mentioning the lots at the end of, I guess it would be the east end of Mill Street. There are some lots there that were designated as PUD and initially looked at as parking. This was about 15 years ago, 10 years, maybe 12 years ago. Looked at putting a multi-level parking facility there to assist with the multitude of activities that we have going on in downtown Bayfield. I know that I hear from people continually that parking is an issue. I live here, parking is an issue. Not so much for me, but for those people that are visiting, they find it very difficult to understand why they have to take a bus from the other side of town if that is available, or why there is no parking unavailable within a reasonable walking distance.
All right, well, I would say what we're doing with public input too is we might have answers, and if we don't, we're writing notes down as we start through our processes with the comp plan and stuff. We have these notes to kind of reference back to what some of the concerns are. So they're added to the record right now that we'll continue to add to.
Well, and I know in the past, when we talked about economic development down Mill Street and revitalizing Mill Street, we did talk about some parking issues then and turning possibly, those streets into one-ways, church into one-ways and having parking, you know, a little more parking spaces there. So I think that's definitely something we can look into, because I do agree that as we grow, as we lure some more businesses downtown, it's gonna be an issue in the future.
Right, well, it would be great to see that in lieu of parking be used to perhaps help to contribute to some
I'm not sure
sort
of a
of
fee.
resolution for the parking.
Yeah, and I'm not familiar with that, but I'll do some research to see, because we found other fees we haven't been familiar with, so I will do some research.
Okay, thank you very much, I appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
I'm glad that everybody's working together to try and find solutions to all of the problems and the things that are facing Bayfield.
Thanks, Pamela. Anybody else on Zoom? All right. We'll pass the microphone around.
Right there's great.
Hi, I'm Jackie Moreland, and you know what, Katie, I love your idea. I don't need a whole park named after my husband. I just want him to be remembered, and in any way that you can do it is fine with me. You know, I do want you to know that Joe Stevenson Park was only dedicated, that little strip of land on the other side of the ditch, because I was there. Because, and that was because Ed had the knowledge to know that there was $1,500 set aside for Joe Stevenson. So we bought, I was part of buying those trees, and I'm not exactly, that was the greatest selection of trees that are out there, but that and a sign, a beautiful big blue sign, that's what I remember, was on the corner there, and my preschool kids were there on Arbor Day in 1983, and we dedicated it to Joe Stevenson. So I would still want that to be, and he can have the whole thing if he wants. But the fact is, the school district did own that, and that came up earlier this evening in the conversation, that the school district still owns, or will own, the rodeo grounds. So when that happened in the 90s, when the school district, or the school district decided they didn't want it, they gave it to Bayfield, and it was never given a real name. That's all I want you to know. So, yes, Katie, that's fine with me, as long as Ed is remembered, because he was a significant person in this community, and he did care about what happened here. So, thank you very much. And who else wants to talk?
Oh, boy. Phyllis Ludwig, and I'm part of the Schroeder Ditch. And I approached the board some time ago with all these annexations, and I told them to think about the water supply. The sewer plant is going to have to be enlarged. The streets cannot handle the extra traffic, and our schools are busting at the seams. And on the Schroeder Ditch, that water will remain in the ditch. The town does get shares from it when it's annexed, but not that much. One reason, the Indians are at the end of our ditch, and what they say goes. So be aware of that. And they have got to have their water, or we'll all be sorry, I'm afraid. So think about the drought. Thank you.
All right. So my name is J.D. Burke. Some of you have seen me before. You might know me better as the Upper Pine River Fire Protection District Fire Marshal. So for a long time now, we've been enjoying a strong relationship with Katie and getting a lot of good work done. About 4 months ago, we took a significant uptick in our productivity and efficiency because of Nicole. The fire district has several issues we would like the board to pay attention to, but most of those you've heard before tonight, or already tonight. Most of them you will see come through Nicole and Katie. They'll look to you something like continuing to work on the land use code and the comp plan, strengthening the enforcement, Currently, if you call the fire marshal because you have a bona fide fire code issue, I get to call the sheriff. If I can get the sheriff go out, it's probably going to be a $50 ticket to those people. That's probably not what we want as a town. Continuing to work on our workflows, we're getting our groove on and becoming much more efficient. I'll talk about that here in a minute. And I've been talking with Nicole about International Fire Code. So what we didn't talk about here is that as a fire marshal, Colorado State expects me to enforce IFC 2021. Remember, we're on 2015. 2021 on the schools and any organization that the Colorado State has purview over, which typically is daycares and schools. That doesn't rock our world too much unless we're busting at the seams and you want to try and build a new school. Then they're going to be, like you talked about, they're going to be out of phase with the rest of the world, even worse than we already are. You'll hear all of this again after Nicole and a bunch of other people vet this out. There's a lot of reasons, a lot of kind of nuances in there. But what you should take away from Katie and Nicole and myself is that Upper Pine is trying to present as a unified service with the town, and I think we're making progress where we work together as a team, and you can expect more of that. For the board specifically, one of the things that the fire district has an interest in is what Katie was talking about with the near field land use code management. So that is, we have areas to the south and to the west. You might call them Gem Village or Buck Highway, those kind of areas, which currently are under county and LaPlade organization. And some of them are commingled because they're using town sewer, for example. And that makes it really difficult for guys like me because I have to try and encourage them to conform to town standards with county standards that are maybe 2 revisions behind and soon be 3 revisions. Or, it's just a mix. It goes right back to this thing that we've got people splattered all over on all sorts of different codes. And in particular in the Gem Village side, the west side, we have reason to believe, especially now that LaPlade has gone through there, that more light industrial stuff will move from Durango to that unincorporated area between Bayfield and Durango because there's just no real estate and there's no rules out there. So that's fine. They'll put some stuff up, but eventually they'll want to come into town and I'm going to be in a weak position because I won't be able to encourage them very forcefully to conform to town standards without some help managing that thing that Katie was talking about is the areas where Bayfield's going to be growing. The other big problem we would encourage the board, you've already heard this, affordable housing. So we have a horrible time paying firefighters to support this district. One of the reasons why is because they can't afford to live here. So we talked about that earlier, and we have designs within the fire department to try and assuage that, but it is a big dragon that's currently lurking and not actively taking out anybody, but it's going to get big and ugly quickly. The other thing, I brought, our annual report has been released for 2021. I brought copies if anybody wants some. In there, you'll see that we responded to about 1,100 plus calls last year. Some 64% of those were medical calls. And some large portion of those, if you look at me as a fire marshal and think less of a fire marshal and more as a risk reduction person, a large portion of the medical calls that I can influence as a risk reduction person were elder care and senior health type issues. So it is in my best interest, and I would encourage the town of Bayfield and our kind of our community to not neglect our senior services. We will do our part to try and drive down that risk and reduce those call volume from the senior population, do more outreach, more training and stuff like that. But eventually it's gonna come down to where we do something together as a town, or I send an ambulance to every house to check on our elders when they fall or when they're having medical issues or welfare calls, that kind of stuff. So just to recap, look forward to Katie and Nicole and I doing more to make the place a better place. Any comments or questions before I turn it over?
Actually, can I ask one? So, I know Chief Evans has mentioned to me about, the builds of new homes and having fire, like, building materials for the exterior of your home that would not go up in flames
Yep.
as easily.
Flame retardant
Thank you.
construction.
I don't know what it's
Yeah,
called.
or flame resistant.
Sorry. Yes, stucco. So, when we are looking at these developments and builds, is there anything within what we're looking at that they're following that we won't have a Marshall fire that could be much worse than because of this new build material that they might be using or not using?
Yeah, so the short answer is yes. The longer answer is that is the tip of that iceberg that we were talking about earlier. It gets into a very deep discussion. So as a fire marshal, I would strongly encourage the town of Bayfield to adopt wholesale IFC 2021 and or 2024, right? And including the wildland urban interface codes, even though they don't really apply here. Now, having said that, the thing that you're talking about, the cladding for a house in town, is not in the fire codes. It's in the building or residential codes. And that's where the dragon lives. So congratulations, I'm a great guy. You do everything I say. You adopt 2021 or 2024. The town probably wouldn't feel a lot of difference there because it doesn't put a lot of weight on anybody. But to do it properly and avoid a lot of headaches, you want to bring all the energy codes and everything else with it. And you're going to feel that. So go from 2015 to 2018 to something better will be a patent cost to the building trades here. And then we have to weigh the difference. Okay, so congratulations, you accept 2024, and now you have some really cool codes on how to handle vertistops and drone taxi landing pads, right? Okay, what else? Yeah, so there are good stuff in there, but for our day-to-day operation, it doesn't change your world much. As opposed to shifting the energy codes, the changes in there would be actually felt by the subdivisions that are coming in. And we have to decide what's worth it.
The electrical code and the building code cover a lot of the building material. There's whole sections of flame retardant materials, fire extinguishants, and all that stuff. And then the urban code that he was speaking about addresses setbacks and things like that. So it's also in the building codes, and that's why at some point in our development, we should probably have a serious discussion about making sure those are up to date and appropriate for the community of Bayfield.
So
But it's also like, with those developers, are we pricing out developers from our
Yeah,
location? So it's that fine line between
The
that.
consumer would, the cost of materials has already exponentially grown, and we've had to, I build houses, so we've had to lay even thicker prices on to make where we can make our money and build these houses, and we're still only building 1,800 square foot, we're not building these mansions, but we're selling them like they are. And you jump into one of these codes where all of a sudden we have to have fire retardant plywood and all this stuff that's gonna change, you're looking at an 1,800 square foot home probably going for 700,000 instead of 5. That's just the material needed to cut it, to apply it to your house, do it right, all new inspections for all these things. It's not, the builders will still build them, but your consumers are gonna just get hammered with an unreasonable price for a home that is not worth that.
And that's why we kind of say, we're not gonna just bring a code to you and say adopt this. We're gonna look at, we'll probably do some scenarios. That's what I think makes sense, and working with our building official and working with fire and try and look at, okay, what will this do, and then what's the balance? Affordability versus energy efficiency, there is a balance somewhere, and that's where this decision body, it has to come from you all, but we'll try and give you as much of the facts as we can so you can make that decision.
So one pragmatic solution that Nicole already put on the table earlier that you may have missed is that we as a general group, if I can speak for you, favor education. So even though we're on 2015, we're not shy about saying the modern codes encourage X, Y, and Z. Not requiring it, just making sure that people know that, there is a reason why the residential sprinkler codes are stronger these days. And we can talk about it over beers sometime. But when it's not required in certain circumstances in Bayfield, but we make that information available, should somebody want to put that in there for whatever reasons. And my crystal ball is not any better than yours, but I suspect the part of the pressure on doing some of these more expensive things, not going to be us. It's going to be your insurance. Because they're going to say, I'm not going to, we just spent all of our money on Boulder. I'm not going to insure your house because you live in a wildland interface, unless you have some kind of mitigator. And then it'll be up to the homeowner to do the cost-benefit analysis to say, well, it's worth it to me to put up pro panel because it drives my insurance rates down, or whatever.
Well, and that goes back to even code adoption. We do ISO ratings, which is for insurance purposes, and the town, building departments, and fire departments usually do those, and when you have a better rating, your insurance rates for the whole area go down. And so one of those factors is what codes are you on? And so you don't want to be so far behind, like I'll say LaPlata County is on the 2003 fire code. You don't want to be so far behind, but you don't, again, going back to, you don't always need to be at the newest, because those, I think Jason said it best, I mean, they haven't been tested, they haven't been tried. And so somewhere there's a balance there again. And we'll kind of try and weed through all that as we're talking about this with the county and how we want to move forward and bring that all to you. And, if you want to look at the newest ones, we can, and we can kind of show you what the differences would be.
Any other comments or questions before I yield the mic?
No, thank you. Appreciate your.
Who is next? These guys are Captain Obvious.
Good job, JD.
Yeah.
Whole new page now.
Brian Blanchard, 627 Louisiana Drive. First of all, grateful for Nicole and Katie. Huge upgrade for our town right there and all this other stuff. I'm going to cut all my comments kind of in half because everybody's tired and it's late. But on codes, I think there's a reason for codes, and it's typically for safety issues. That's a biggie. I mean, you think about that. It's like setbacks for oil and gas. There's a reason all these other towns, Carbondale, Gypsum, Eagle, go on and on and on through Muni Code, have all adopted new setback rules and regs. It's based on safety for the citizens of their towns and cities. Simple as that. The other thing that I just quickly want to talk about is the audio portion of how the town records meetings sucks. It's horrible. I have tried to go onto these meetings that Katie has sent me or linked me onto. I have my volume on max and I still can't understand it. So I'm just saying, in this day and age, let this guy over here who's the techie guy, he needs to fix that. So let's put him to work, okay?
Which guy?
He knows who he is over there. Okay, so a couple of specific things and then I'll give it up. Impact fees. I'm a believer in the developers. You know this from me. The developers should pay their fair shares. We're looking at all kinds of issues coming up, whether it's water or codes or whatever it is. I'm a believer that the developers are going to come. There's no other place for them to go. We're still a deal. They're going to come to Bayfield. So let's get a fair share amount of money out of these people. They're making huge amounts of money and taking that money somewhere else. The design standards should be built into either the comp plan or the land use code. We don't really have design guidelines for our future projects that are coming up. I think the developer should also pay for current and future road upgrades. In the case of Mustang Crossing, you're not only going to have all the vehicles coming out of there at whatever that number is onto our roads and our intersections, but you're also going to have all the construction vehicles coming and going on our roads. That's huge. That's a huge impact to the town. And you have let them off the hook on May 17th to pay the collateral that they should be paying for that, in my opinion. Let them pay what they should be paying for not only the current impact, but the future impact for our town. Why should the citizens or the town be burdened with that expense? They can afford it. Just in the dirt in Mustang Crossing, just for the dirt work that he's gonna sell lots, he's gonna gross over $6 million. That's a lot of money. For him to pay a collateral and cough up that 100% of whatever that number is deemed for that project, they should do it. That's my opinion. The impact fees should be specific to items that the town really needs. I'm also a believer that you should be looking at specific things that you are kind of here to talk about, but you need to interject specific things. That's kind of what we're hoping you do. We have our trust in you to do that. Things like open space, impact fees, connectivity, fees in lieu of, Zeroscape, we talked about that. Definitely the state trumps the HOAs. The working group is a great idea, I think. That can be a variety of citizens, business owners, all of that. I also think that we can dig out volunteers for things for the town, whether it's helping with the Parks and Rec or whatever that is. And then the last thing I'll leave you with is my mantra for the town, and that is when you hear of something or think about something, ask yourself, is it good for the town? And is it good for the citizens? And keep it simple. Thank you.
Kat Katzos, 525 Dove Ranch Road. I was really happy to hear some water discussion tonight and some deep concern for that. That means everybody's starting to pay attention. Yay. I don't know if you're aware, Nicole's probably aware, but the town of Durango will be adopting their sustainability plan. I encourage all of you to look at their sustainability plan. It addresses energy, transportation and development patterns, consumption and waste indicators, water, and natural systems and ecology. It's an awesome driving document, and it is what I believe is their water element that is now being attached to their master comp plan. So they decided to do an entire sustainability plan that's quite excellent. In that, I would also say that the sister town, I would call it a sister town, Ridgeway, is close to us in our kind of equal proximity to the river, our water source, population, growth, economic challenges, and they have also adopted a water element into their comp plan that they just approved. And they look at number one, water supply. So I think, you know, what we've done as a town in creating water through our new water treatment plant and our stormwater, that sort of thing, they have just-in-time automated charts that allow them to determine year by year whether they have the right water supply or not. And it allows for just-in-time decisions and better drought management. So kudos to our town also for enacting a drought management plan, but we need to find methodologies that give us just-in-time data so we can truly understand our water supplies. It is a moving target. So today, all that was talked about was what we have the capacity to treat, what we have the capacity to store, what we have the capacity to deliver on. But it does not address the very basic issue of, you know, declining water supply and increasing water demand. It does not answer that. It doesn't close that gap in real terms. And it does matter in our decision making because we all want to live here and we all want to live here, you know, in perpetuity if we can, and our families are going to move here and that sort of thing. So the other thing I would add is that on a local level, we would create a sustainability plan. But on a global level, we need to consider the entire Pine River watershed. And we need to lead in education, lead in partnership. We need to bring together all the players, the ranchers, the farmers, the water districts, the ditch managers, the dam managers. We need to bring them in. We need to host water conferences every year at our Bayfield Event Center that invites the public in and says, we want to educate you, we want to share where we're at, we want you to know what the ranchers and the farmers are doing along the Pine River to create sustainability within their practices, what the town is doing to create better practices, include green water sustainability codes into our land use and building codes. There's so much great research out there that has already been done that we can pilfer and design our own on. So I would encourage that water, and the youths need to be involved. Again, we have to think about all the users along the Pine River and incorporate that and be a leader for our valley. That just the town doing sustainability won't get us all the way there. So we have to make it a universal, challenge and vision. Also, when you look at our comp plan, our mission statement and our vision is very limited. When you look at other comp plans that have just been adapted, they incorporate all kinds of visionary goals. And we really need to look at that. We can't be so simple. And lastly, I'm going to talk about the rodeo. So you all know that there's a potential Bayfield Equestrian Events Center that's probably going to come up for your review. This is owned by the church. This provides no tax base to us. If you move our town rodeo and you implement means and manners to bring in people that are going to spend money here, you're going to collect taxes for, it's going to be a benefit, it's a better access off of the 501 into the unit that is actually zoned residential. It is currently in the town boundary. We're annexing in more land for development. This land is already designated residential. And to change that zoning to allow for this mixed-use church thing that's going to have, an amphitheater and a horse arena and RV camping, and their second access is going to be in Up Dove Ranch. Now how are they going to pay for infrastructure? How are we going to maintain the roads with the impact on that? So please, look closely at the town really incorporating the rodeo as a benefit to how we can increase, business here and income here and make it legit and let it be a town service. And lastly, I'd like to share other ways to get the word out. So today when I went for my walk through my neighborhood, there were a lot of people with their sprinklers on. So obviously they either didn't get the drought notification, but you guys, the town could rent one of those signs, those electric signs. You could put it in the center of the rotundo, whatever you call that, the traffic turn, roundabout. And it says, folks, we're in a drought 1. You cannot water between this time and this time, or you can only water between this time and this time. And check your flippin' sprinklers, because most of the town's water is going down the sidewalks and into the gutters. So that would be another way. And then another suggestion would be Pine River Shares. You could include flyers in the food bags that the town could provide, and also the farmers market. That is a really big deal. It's really picking up some speed. The other thing too is if you move that rodeo, that farmers market should be held in the town square, right there off of Mill Street. The activity, you know, I mean, you know, we gotta be more global in our forward-thinking, you know, investments and planning here. So I think I covered everything I wanted to say. Anybody else?
I just have a minute.
Sure.
Go ahead. I'm Linda Werner, 507 Dove Ranch Road, and I'm with her. I've seen the plan. We actually took advantage of the church's offer to buy the extra lot, so we have a nice big yard. But when I asked him what was going to happen back there, well, we're not sure. Maybe a horse arena or something. And I thought, well, that can't be too bad. When I saw the $24 million plans he was putting in there with the vehicles coming down my street, which if you have cars parked on the street, isn't wide enough for 2 cars to go by, as it is. I mean, it's especially at the end where there's the islands in the middle when you first enter the neighborhood. It should not happen. We should not have to live with commercial vehicles coming down our residential street. That's it. Thank you.
Is that everybody? Do anybody from staff or board have any other comments or questions, or? I think we'll work hard, I think staff will work hard on looking through some of these comments and getting back, some answers, and I think we certainly have a lot to dig into. I appreciate everyone coming out, staying late. Katie, do you have anything you want to add?
No, thank you very much for the public attending. Appreciate that.
I think it was a very productive conversation, and we appreciate you all. So we'll go ahead and adjourn. It's 9:12.